Hey guys, tonight we're heading into the sun-baked world of ancient Persia, where the sky is a white-hot dome, the air wavers in mirage-heavy waves, and yet somehow, someone hands you a cup of wine that's blissfully, impossibly chilled. You're standing in a bustling market, the sand hot enough to roast chickpeas beneath your sandals. Camels grumble in the distance, the vendors shout above the din, hawking saffron, lapis lazuli, and bundles of mint, but you're focused on the curious sight ahead, a servant ducking into a low, shaded chamber, and emerging moments later with a clay jug that beads with condensation, cold, in the middle of the desert. How? This isn't some royal magic trick, though it may feel like one. What you're about to uncover is a story of architectural genius, mountain snow caravans, ancient refrigeration systems, and more than a few instances of people going very far out of their way for a good glass of wine. All this centuries before electricity, modern plumbing, or even the concept of refreshments on demand. You probably wouldn't survive a week here, not without a heat stroke at least, but the ingenuity of this civilization, that might just chill you out enough to forget you're sweating. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I always love seeing our little global sleep club grow. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You squint against the blazing Persian sun as you follow a well-worn road leading to the ancient city of Yazd. Your path weaves through sand-coloured buildings and walls, so sun-bleached they appear white, almost ghostly, in the midday light. This city, like many in the Persian Empire, thrived not in spite of the desert, but because it learned how to outwit it. Somewhere beyond the marketplace and the caravanserais, filled with gossip and goat stew, lies your true destination, a sunken courtyard with arched passageways and faint flute music leaking into the air. You're entering the heart of Persian domestic life, where the wine gets served cool even when it's 110 degrees outside. Ancient Persia, at its height under the Achaemenid Empire, think Cyrus the Great and Darius then, covered vast territories, from Egypt to the Indus Valley. But no matter the region, the Persian knack for managing heat bordered on the obsessive. Buildings weren't just for shelter, they were cooling machines. You step into a noble family's home. It's not a grand palace, but even this modest estate boasts a courtyard shaded by overhanging walls and date palms. Water trickles gently in a narrow canal at your feet. More than ornamental, it's strategically placed to humidify and cool the air. And it's working. The temperature drops by at least 10 degrees the moment you step inside. The clay bricks underfoot stay surprisingly cool, and you can feel it even through your sandals. One fact: ancient Persian homes often followed a central courtyard plan, with thick mud brick walls, vaulted ceilings, and water features designed to circulate air and maintain surprisingly stable indoor temperatures, even in the brutal summers. Now here's the quirky part. That canal, it's part of a qanat, an underground aqueduct system that delivered water from mountain springs miles away, travelling under the desert in a gentle slope to avoid evaporation. It's both water supply and natural air conditioner. And guess what's sitting in a little clay pot, half submerged in that canal? Yep, your wine. These courtyard channels became an unofficial fridge. Locals learned to float jars of sherbet, milk or wine in cool water. Nothing icy, of course, not yet, but still enough to offer that mild chill that makes a hot day tolerable. Not unlike putting your soda in the stream during a camping trip. Only this stream is artificial, and 2,500 years old. As you settle under the shade, sipping something between grape juice and light wine, sweet, tart, probably laced with herbs, a servant fans you lazily with a frond. You try not to think about how sweaty you are. You fail. Historians still argue whether everyday Persians enjoyed these cooling tricks, or if they were reserved mainly for the elite. The evidence is fuzzy. Many of the structures we've uncovered were wealthier homes, better preserved, better documented, but ancient poetry and folk tales suggest the tricks of thermal control weren't unknown to the average family. If you had access to water and a cellar, you had options. And now, here's one of those little mysteries that make historians chew their beards. Some accounts suggest that Persian wines weren't just cooled in water. They may have been steeped in herbs like mint, or stored in jars rubbed with some kind of clay resin mix that kept them cooler longer. No one's exactly sure what the resin was, or if it acted like a refrigerant. One clay jar found near Susa had traces of what might be pine resin, and also a faint hint of citrus. Was it flavour, insulation, accidental slop from a citrus grove? No one knows. Your host, meanwhile, refills your cup. You're encouraged to stay a while, relax, maybe nap. And you do, right there in the shaded courtyard, lulled by the breeze, the burble of water, and the gentle knowledge that somewhere in this impossibly hot desert, someone figured out how to chill wine thousands of years before mini-fridges and crushed ice. You dream of wind towers and soft linen robes, and yes, maybe another cup. You wake to the sound of footsteps padding over sun-warmed tiles. Not hurried, not frantic, just the steady rhythm of someone who knows exactly where they're going and isn't in a rush. A servant places a ceramic tray of melon slices and a tiny cup of rosewater by your side, and you take it without opening your eyes. Somewhere nearby, a dove coos lazily. The sun's lowered a little in the sky, but the heat still wraps around everything like a thick wool cloak. This time, you're not in the middle of nowhere. You're nestled inside the inner courtyards of a Persian palace. The kind of place where kings walked in embroidered slippers, where scribes scratched at wax tablets, and where architects designed entire structures with one mission in mind: defy the desert. You glance up. No harsh sunlight touches your skin. That's because the entire courtyard is engineered with long eaves and overhangs that throw deep shade. The air smells of baked earth, citrus leaves, and something metallic, maybe the bronze incense burners puffing away quietly near the entrances. But the most remarkable part isn't the look or the scent, it's the feel. The walls are thick, not regular thick, insanely thick, mud brick, stacked and compressed into massive, heat-resistant barriers. These walls don't just hold up roofs, they hold off heat. Inside the rooms around you, vaulted ceilings curve like upside-down bowls, pulling hot air upward and away from the floor where people sit, eat, and yes, sip wine. Here's your mainstream fact. Achaemenid palaces, like those in Persepolis and Susa, weren't just power symbols, they were cooling machines. Built with mathematical precision, their layout channeled natural airflow, leveraging both shade and water features to create microclimates within the larger compound. And while they didn't have thermometers, they had something better: centuries of trial and error. In the cooler wings of the palace, storage rooms held amphorae of wine. Some amphorae were buried halfway into the ground, their curved bases poking from cellar floors, sealed with cork and beeswax. Others hung in shaded niches, the clay still cool to the touch, even at noon. The servants would pour from these into slender-necked jars, designed not just for looks, but for keeping things cool. Narrow openings slowed evaporation, and the jars themselves were lightly porous, creating a cooling effect as moisture slowly seeped and evaporated. And now, a quirky bit for you. Archaeologists have found early Persian drip trays under wine vessels, shallow basins of water, or even damp sand designed to amplify that evaporation chill. It's like ancient swamp cooling, but for your happy hour. These trays may have been scented with mint too, because why not be cool and smell nice? As you stroll farther into the palace, your sandals slap against intricate mosaic floors. Some show scenes of banquets with guests reclining on low cushions, raising cups that shimmer with gold leaf. The wine at these banquets wasn't served just to quench thirst. It was art, status, and science all in one. If the drink was cool, You were cool, literally and figuratively. Now, historians still debate how far this cooling tech extended beyond the palatial world. Did the middle class of Persia have similar setups in miniature? Some evidence from modest urban homes shows narrow shaded alleys, water storage tanks, and floor-level storage niches that suggest a scaled-down version of royal cooling tricks. It's one of those gaps in the record where archaeologists shrug and say, probably, but we can't be sure yet. You pass under an arched portico, its curved roof lined with ceramic tiles in desert blues and dusty turquoise. Up ahead, a servant pulls aside a hanging reed curtain and reveals a semi-open room with reclining couches, low tables, and a sunken fountain burbling quietly in the centre. No gushing jets, no marble swans, just a simple trickle of mountain water threading through a shallow basin, and that's when you spot it, another amphora half submerged in the water, beaded with tiny droplets. Wine, still cool. It's not just a luxury, it's the result of deliberate design. Every beam, every tile, every corner of this palace conspires to defeat the sun, not through brute force, but through balance and cleverness. It's like a giant whisper saying, "We see you, heat, but not today." Outside, the sun scorches the horizon. Inside, you sip something sweet and slightly tart, laced with herbs, and wonder how much of this brilliance we forgot over the centuries. Probably a lot. You lean back on a velvet cushion, breathing in the cool air, and realize something odd. You're not sweating anymore. Maybe it's the wine, or maybe the Persians really did figure out how to make the desert tolerable. A bell chimes softly in the distance, not the clanging sort used to summon soldiers, but a melodic, almost dainty tone, likely used to signal the arrival of something worth noting. You wander toward the sound, down a gravel path lined with cypress trees and crumbling stone benches. The heat still swirls around you like honey, thick and slow, but you notice something strange. The people aren't panicking. They're gathering, smiling even. Why? Because the ice has arrived. Yes, ice. In the middle of a Persian summer, you find yourself at the edge of a city square as a caravan arrives. The camels are irritable, their long lashes caked with dust, but their burden is precious. Bundles of snow, wrapped in thick felt and packed in wicker baskets. The snow comes down from the Zagros mountains, carried at night when the desert is slightly less murderous, and kept as cold as possible using layers of straw, wool, and sheer optimism. This is the ice trade, one of the lesser sung miracles of the ancient world. You stand aside as the porters pass, grunting under the weight of something that, by all laws of nature, shouldn't be here right now. One mainstream fact: even as early as 500 BCE, Persians were hauling snow from mountain peaks to urban centres, using it to cool food, store perishables, and most luxuriously, chill drinks. Royal households had entire staff hierarchies devoted to the transport, storage, and careful distribution of snow. It was status in crystalline form. And here comes the quirky detail. Some of that snow wasn't just for chilling. It was eaten. Mixed with fruit syrup, it became an early version of sharbat, a kind of Persian snow cone. Picture that, you, in the blazing desert, slurping grape-flavoured mountain snow from a ceramic bowl, wondering whether to call this hydration or dessert. Now, back to those bundles of snow. Once delivered, they had to be stored. Fast. That's where yak chows came in, but let's not skip ahead. For now, you're watching teams of workers gently lower the baskets into sunken chambers lined with polished stone. These ice pits are shaded by nearby buildings and partially cooled by underground qanats. The snow inside is patted down into bricks, wrapped again in straw, and then carefully covered with a layer of insulating material, usually sawdust, bark shavings, or even powdered charcoal. Historians still argue whether this snow trade was routine or strictly ceremonial. Some believe only the elite had access, and even then, It was seasonal and precious. Others point to the sheer number of snow storage pits discovered in ordinary towns as evidence that at least some cool treats trickle down to the general public, probably on holidays or festival days, like the ancient Persian version of summer popsicle season. As you wander past the unloading area, a child offers you a cup of syrupy ice, his hands sticky and grinning. It's not wine, but the principle is the same. Chill the body, cheer the soul. The syrup tastes of mulberries and basil, shockingly cold against your sun-scorched tongue. It melts fast, and so do you. One porter wipes his brow and mutters something about a lucky batch. You ask why. He explains, sometimes if the snow is packed just right and hasn't melted too much, it arrives as dense, ice-like chunks. These are prized, because they last longer in storage, and more importantly, they can be split and distributed at feasts. You imagine Darius himself reclining in a palace courtyard, sipping pomegranate wine with one hand and idly chewing a pebble of snow with the other. Pure decadence. You follow the porters as they begin the uphill trek back toward the mountains, this time carrying trade goods, bolts of silk, ceramic wares, bundles of dried saffron. The snow runs one way, the economy runs the other, a desert of give and take. You pause under the shadow of an old cypress tree, letting your fingertips trail the rim of your empty cup. The caravan disappears into the haze, dust swirling behind them like a slow-moving ghost, and you realise the snow they brought you today began its journey weeks ago, packed high on a frozen slope, entrusted to camels, straw, and the sheer willpower of people who refuse to let the desert win. You feel a little cooler now, not just from the snow, but from the strange comfort of knowing that even in ancient times, someone out there looked at a heat wave and said, "No thanks. I want something on the rocks." The path ahead curves into a quieter district. No porters, no palace guards, just a winding alley shaded by tall adobe walls. You duck your head slightly as the street narrows, the temperature dropping almost imperceptibly with every step. There's no breeze, no fan, no whisper of machinery, and yet it's cooler here. You pause, look up. Ah, that explains it. You've entered the embrace of a Qanat neighbourhood. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Qanats, those ancient, sloping underground tunnels, were the lifeblood of Persian engineering. Designed to tap into mountain aquifers, they funneled water underground across dozens of miles to reach settlements, farms and homes. The brilliance, the system used gravity alone. No pumps, no lifting, just slope, math and persistence. Now, as you press your hand to one of the clay walls, you realise what's really going on. That soft hum of coolness you feel, that's not just shade, it's infrastructure. Beneath your feet, chilled water flows in the Qanat Channel, its movement gently cooling the earth, and, by extension, everything above it, including you. You duck into a modest courtyard house, the kind a mid-ranking bureaucrat might have owned. It's unassuming, mud brick exterior, a low door, and a narrow entry passage. Inside, it opens like a secret. High walls trap shade, and a small pool at the centre reflects filtered sunlight. The pool isn't just decoration, it's connected to the Qanat system, and its slow, steady replenishment releases tiny droplets into the air. You sit cross-legged near the edge, fingertips skimming the surface. Cool, soft water. You'd never guess it came from miles away, threading silently beneath villages and fields. Here's the quirky bit. Some Persian homes had wind catchers, tall, chimney-like structures called badgias, built directly over Qanat shafts. These towers trapped wind at the top and funneled it downward, where it passed over the cool Qanat water, creating natural air conditioning. If you were lucky enough to have both a Qanat and a wind catcher in your home, you didn't need a single fan blade. You feel it now, a draft tickling your neck, rising from a vent near the floor. The badgia above you must be working, without a motor, without noise, just a miracle of ancient engineering. a whisper of a breeze where there should be none. Historians still debate just how widespread these badger systems were. Elite homes and administrative buildings certainly had them, but were they standard in rural villages? Some argue that the labour required made them rare outside city centres, while others point to scattered remnants in desert towns as proof that the badger was more common than once thought. Either way, you're in one now, and you're not complaining. A servant glides into the courtyard, carrying a narrow-necked flask. He pours into a copper goblet, and you take a sip. It's wine, but something's off. Not in a bad way. In a woe. What is that? Way. There's a taste. Herbal. Maybe even floral. The drink is cooler than the air around you. Turns out this house has a Mashrabia-style storage alcove built directly into the connat wall. Clay jars are kept inside, where the earthen walls wick away moisture and hold the vessel at just above the groundwater temperature. The wine here is infused with Gul-e-Muhammadi, damask rose petals, used both to flavour and to help preserve. You take another sip, slightly chilled, aromatic, a little bit smug-making. In the far corner of the room, baskets of fruit rest in ceramic trays, half submerged in connat runoff. Not wastewater, just overflow that's carefully routed for cooling and cleaning. You see figs, grapes, and one lone pear, all holding their shape in the summer heat. The ancient fridge, as it were. You lie back on a woven mat, the scent of damp clay and fruit rising gently around you. There's a ceiling fan here, but it doesn't move. It doesn't need to. The airflow is happening all around you, in ways invisible and perfect. Somewhere down the alley, children laugh. You imagine them jumping across stone pavers, using their feet to test for hidden kannat channels. The cool ones, the magic tiles, as they call them. You smile. Even now, the heat is held at bay, not by brute force, but by listening to the land, to gravity, to water that flows patiently underground, waiting to be invited in. As your eyes drift closed, the goblet still cool in your hand, you think, this isn't just cooling, it's elegance, it's quiet rebellion against the sun. By now, your limbs have relaxed into the rhythm of the place. The sweat behind your knees has dried. The wine hums gently in your veins, cool and rose-tinted. You rise slowly, passing back through the kannat-cooled corridor, sandals scuffing against the clay floor. Outside, the air warms again, but you carry that subterranean chill with you, like a secret. Today, you're visiting the palace kitchens, not the polished banquet halls, but the back passages where things clatter, boil, and get barked at by people with sauce-stained tunics. It's here, among the marble prep counters and the open hearths, that wine is not only served, but prepared, stored, and chilled in ways you wouldn't expect. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The ancient Persians didn't just drink wine, they revered it. As early as the Achaemenid period, wine was part of diplomatic gifts, royal ceremonies, and daily meals of the elite. The vineyards of Shiraz, yes, that Shiraz, were famed for their sweet, complex wines. It was a staple of both celebration and healing. But this palace kitchen is more than a place for pouring drinks. It's a cooling laboratory. You follow a harried cook to the back storeroom, where rows of amphorae sit nestled into sand pits, not just sitting on sand, buried in it. Sand cooled slightly by being kept near the earth's natural water table. You crouch down and touch the clay of one jug. It's surprisingly cold, not ice cold, but crisp, like a spring morning. Now for the quirky. Some amphorae had goat hide sleeves. Yes, you heard that right. Goat leather, soaked in water, then wrapped tightly around wine vessels. As the water slowly evaporated from the hide, it pulled heat from the jug. A prehistoric wine chiller. You wonder if modern sommeliers would approve. Probably not. Too leathery. Too goat. One nearby vessel holds boza, a mildly fermented grain drink, less alcohol, more tang. It's reserved for staff and guards, and it too sits partly submerged in a narrow trough, fed by, you guessed it, a secondary kannat channel. The head chef casually ladles some into a copper cup, offers it to you. It's cool, frothy, and faintly spicy, like sourdough in beverage form. Not bad, if you can get past the bits. Historians still debate how much ancient Persians understood about fermentation temperatures. Some argue they simply noticed that cooler vessels produced better wine and ran with it. Others suggest a more deliberate science, especially among royal brewers and court physicians, who link temperature with temperament. Yes, that old humoral theory, where hot wines made you rash and cold ones made you sleepy. Guess which one you're drinking right now. You watch as an attendant brings in ice, actual mountain snow, as in earlier, to mix with rose syrup and pour over wine for the king's table. Not directly into the wine, mind you, but in a double vessel. One jug inside another, like an ancient thermos. The outer one is packed with snow and straw. The inner one holds the wine. You nod. Efficient, elegant, over-engineered in a way that feels satisfyingly extra. In one corner, a ceramicist repairs a cracked wine vessel, muttering about glaze thickness and thermal shock. Turns out cooling drinks wasn't just about storage, it was about material science. Porous clay could sweat and cool a liquid, but glaze it too heavily and you trap the heat. So they balanced it, half-glazed amphorae, or ones with patterns painted on in thin slip rather than thick glaze. Wine tech, 500 BCE style. You run your finger along the base of one such amphora, feeling the subtle texture of the unglazed patch. It's rough, purposeful. Someone figured this out centuries before wine cellar became a status symbol. You return to the main kitchen where roasted meats are being basted, sweet stews stirred, and trays of fresh herbs arranged for the evening feast. But what catches your eye is a low stone basin, barely noticeable, where cups and bowls soak in cold water. This isn't cleaning, it's tempering. A servant lifts one out, sets it aside. You touch it. Cool. Meant to keep the wine inside from warming too fast. Even the cup is chilled. Now that's dedication. You sneak another sip of rose wine and step out into the corridor again. The sun hasn't dimmed. It's still merciless, golden, almost smug. But you're walking through history with a belly full of cold, sweet, clay-chilled elegance. And you're not even halfway through the day. You blink against the light as you step into the courtyard again, adjusting to the glare after the shadowed calm of the palace kitchens. There's music somewhere, a single flute, soft and low, playing a melody so old it feels embedded in the stone under your feet. You follow the sound, moving toward the outer gardens, where aristocrats stroll beneath trellises and servants sweep fallen leaves with palm-frond brooms. You pause under an arbour of grapes, watching their dusty purple skins shimmer in the light. These aren't table grapes, these are wine grapes, small and potent, bred over generations to pack as much sugar into as little pulp as possible. In the heart of the garden, under a cypress's shade, stands a storage pavilion, open walls, a domed ceiling, and beneath it an enormous basin, sunk into the earth. This is what you came to see. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ancient Persian estates often featured dedicated wine storage gardens, both for processing the grape harvest and chilling wine before it was served. The shaded spaces, combined with underground basins and kannat water access, made them ideal for temporary storage, fermentation, and cooling. But the real prize here isn't the wine, it's the container. You kneel beside an enormous charos, a clay vessel as tall as your shoulder, half buried in the earth. Its rim is crusted with old mineral deposits, and a copper spout near the bottom glints in the sun. These vessels weren't moved, they were installed like small infrastructure projects. Pour wine in the top, draw it cool from the bottom, days later, and it worked, thanks to three things: clay, shadow, and time. A youth approaches carrying a fragrant bundle. You recognise the smell before you see the ingredients: mint, dried lime, And something floral, lavender perhaps. It's for a batch of sharbat, a sweetened, wine-adjacent drink made from fruit syrups and infused water. Not alcoholic, but highly prized as a summer refresher. You're handed a cup. You sip. It's cold, really cold, and you glance around in confusion. Here comes the quirky part. Beside the pavilion sits a squat dome of mud brick, low to the ground, almost like a giant termite mound. The youth gestures proudly. Yak chow, he says. Ice pit, yes. Right here in the garden, beneath this modest mound, is a chamber where ice is stored year-round. During winter, water would be poured into shallow canals beside the yak chow at night. By dawn, it froze. The ice was broken up, gathered, and packed with straw into the deep pit beneath the dome. In summer, it was opened sparingly, just enough to chill the sharbat and impress visitors. Historians still debate just how efficient yak chows really were. Some argue they were marvels of insulation and airflow, capable of preserving ice through the entire year. Others claim they required constant tending, with melting inevitable unless winter was exceptionally cold. But here you are, sipping a chilled floral drink in the desert, so you lean toward Team Marvel. You wander deeper into the garden. Shade shifts gently overhead. A woman sits beside a basin filled with pomegranates, slicing them and dropping the ruby seeds into a linen cloth for pressing. Pomegranate wine, tart, intense, sacred, associated with fertility, with celebration, and occasionally with outright messiness. No one drinks it in white linen. You settle near her, watching the juice drip slowly into a clay bowl, nestled into a shallow, kanat-fed stream. The bowl is cracked, repaired with bronze staples hammered into the clay, still used, still beloved. Like everything here, it shows signs of age, but not disrepair. The past isn't distant in this garden. It's practical, constant, cool. A sleepy bee lands on your wrist, buzzing lazily before lifting off again. You follow its flight to a row of flowering herbs, lining a small channel of running water that travelled miles underground just to burble here for a moment, whispering against roots and rocks, before slipping back into the earth. You sigh. The flute music continues. Your cup is empty, but your fingers are damp from condensation, not from glass, but from an unglazed clay mug that sweats gently in the shade. You're not in a palace anymore, not quite. This is somewhere older, more essential, where cooling wine isn't about luxury, it's about knowing the land, the temperature, the time of day, the angle of the sun. The Persians didn't fight the heat, they courted it, outsmarted it, convinced it to let them slip past. And here you are, slipping past with them. The garden grows quieter as the afternoon stretches on. Even the birds seem to pause their chirping, tucked away in the shadows of tamarisk trees and fig groves. You move slowly now, careful not to disturb the stillness. Your path curves along a rutted stone walkway, worn smooth by sandals long gone. On one side, fruit trees lean over a water channel. On the other, low clay walls mark the edge of a vineyard. The grapes hang heavy and low, their skins dusty with bloom. You duck through a small archway and find yourself in another structure, this one lower, cooler, more secluded. There are no guards here, no kitchen bustle, just silence and rows upon rows of tall sealed jars. This is the wine archive, if you will, and you're lucky to be here. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Achaemenid Empire maintained storerooms of wine that were both functional and symbolic. Certain vintages were kept for religious ceremonies, royal anniversaries, or diplomatic offerings. Some amphorae were marked with seals, dates, and vineyard names. Yes, labels. Ancient ones. The more things change. You step past one enormous jar, its seal stamped with the image of a lion and sun, and kneel beside a smaller vessel tucked into the floor. The lid is heavy, but you're curious. You lift it carefully. A faint smell escapes, musty, rich, and surprisingly sweet. Fermented for years, the wine has thickened. It's almost syrup, This is ruby, a concentrated wine used not to drink directly, but to mix into other dishes or drinks, a sweetener, a flavour enhancer, a hint of fermented luxury. Nearby a ledger lies open, not parchment but clay, impressed with cuneiform or Aramaic, depending on who did the cataloguing that day. The writing lists deliveries, dates, quantities, sometimes even destinations. One jar, you're surprised to read, was once sent all the way to India. Historians still debate whether this was trade, tribute, or just a particularly ambitious gift exchange. Then comes the quirky, a jar whose stopper is made from beeswax and cloth. No, not cloth, silk, a thin piece, probably reused from a damaged garment. You chuckle softly. Even ear, recycling. The silk stopper is marked with a dye that smells faintly of saffron. You resist the urge to touch it. It looks delicate, and it's holding in centuries of patience. A servant enters quietly, carrying a long tapering ladle. He dips it into a smaller jar and withdraws a dark, almost black liquid. He pours it into a bowl, adds water, a sprig of something green, and hands it to you with a nod. You sip. It's not what you expected. Smoky, herbal, earthy. This is herbed wine, a mixture used medicinally, calming, supposedly, likely invented by a court physician with an overactive imagination and access to too many plants. You lean back against a wall, the clay cool against your shoulder. This isn't just a cellar, it's a story vault. Each jar is a paragraph, each seal a footnote. The wine doesn't just age here, it waits. It waits for the right guest, the right ritual, the right moment to be opened and remembered. And in this dusty archive, you stumble across the strangest vessel yet. It's painted, not with flowers or animals, but with fish, blue, darting fish, swimming around the jar's base. A nod to the rivers, a joke, a memory of a sea trader who brought back amphorae from Babylon. No one knows. Historians still puzzle over decorative motifs in Persian wine jars. Some say they indicate origin. Others believe they're purely aesthetic, or maybe symbolic, tied to lost myths and local legends. You reach out, lightly touch one of the painted fish. The glaze is cracked but cool. The air in here is rich with clay and ferment, and your eyes feel heavy. You imagine this is what it smelled like to step into a temple storeroom after a long journey, dusted with road and sweat, and be offered a cup so old its grapes had forgotten the sun. Outside, a faint bell rings. Evening's approaching. The palace gears are shifting toward dusk preparations. You stand slowly, bones creaking like ancient shelves. One last glance at the archive before you step back into the light. You're not a sommelier, but today you felt like a steward of something older than taste, something fermented in patience, sealed in ceremony, and cooled in the kindness of shade. The air has cooled slightly as you step back out of the archive. Long shadows stretch across the paving stones, and the low hum of evening activity begins. You follow a path that arcs gently toward the outskirts of the estate, where the land dips into a sunken courtyard, framed by mud brick arches and flowering vines. Here, the mood is lighter, even playful. A small crowd is gathered, servants mostly, but with the air of semi-official duties. They're clustered around what looks like a low pool, rectangular, shallow, and surprisingly clear. On closer inspection, it's not a pool for swimming or reflecting. It's a cooling trough, fed by a narrow stone channel of Connaught water. Clay jugs sit half submerged, arranged neatly, their bases resting in the moving water. Mainstream historical fact time. Ancient Persians used open-air water channels, often integrated into garden and courtyard layouts, as rudimentary refrigeration systems. Pots placed in flowing water could drop in temperature significantly within a few hours, especially if glazed or double-walled. This method was simple but effective, relying on evaporation and the steady chill of underground sourced water. You crouch down beside a jug and run your hand along its surface. The clay is cool to the touch, and a fine sheen of condensation beads along the unglazed section near the top. Someone has scratched a pattern into it, spirals maybe, or waves. You like that someone took the time. Nearby, a group of younger servants are playing a sort of guessing game. Each person has to sample a chilled drink and guess what was added to it. One boy, clearly proud, identifies a blend of quince syrup and cardamom. Another guesses fig and tamarind, but misses the hidden pinch of dried rose petals. They laugh. It's gentle, relaxed, an evening wind down before official duties call again. You're offered a cup. It's slightly cloudy, chilled almost to the point of forming tiny crystals at the rim. You take a sip. Ah, this one's daring, pine resin and grape must. It has a bracing edge, but finishes soft. You raise your eyebrows, impressed. The boy who made it grins shyly. Now here's the quirky tidbit. Buried under the far side of the trough are dozens of small hollow stones. Someone explains they're echo coolers, a nickname, of course, but accurate. These stones, often carved from porous tufa or pumice, were used to enhance airflow. When placed correctly, they encouraged microcurrents that helped keep the water moving and the air a degree or two cooler. An early form of passive engineering that's more instinctual than theoretical. Historians still debate whether this technique was standardized or just something passed down locally. Some think it was part of a broader knowledge system about airflow and thermal mass. Others believe it was trial and error craftsmanship, passed through generations of labourers who simply noticed what worked and stuck with it. As you lean back against the courtyard wall, your eye catches a trio of musicians setting up in the corner, a harp-like instrument, a drum, and a ney flute. They don't play yet, but they're preparing, loosening the strings, wetting the reed, tapping the drum skin with gentle precision. Music will come, but not until the stars do. Someone passes by with a bowl of crushed ice, real ice, clearly from the Akchal, and pours it over a tray of dates and dried apricots. A decadent touch. The fruits glisten in the dying sun, and you wonder who first thought to chill something sweet in the desert. It feels like a gift. One of the senior kitchen staff, an older woman with a linen scarf tied snug around her head, settles beside you. She eyes your cup, nods in approval, then points to a vessel at the far end of the trough. "That one's for the priest," she says. "He likes it with basil and a pinch of crushed fig seeds. He says it helps him dream." Dreams indeed. You sip again. The breeze rustles through the vines above, and a tendril brushes your cheek like a sleepy cat. You could fall asleep here, and maybe you will, because in this quiet corner of empire, where science and superstition blend with spice and song, the act of chilling wine becomes something more. It becomes ritual, memory, comfort, not just preservation, but intention. As if by cooling the liquid, you also cooled the air, the mind, the worries of another long sun-bleached day. Even the frogs in the nearby irrigation channel seem to have picked a slower tempo tonight. You stir slightly, blinking in the fading light as the courtyard grows quieter still. The musicians have begun their slow, lilting tune. Nothing too grand, just a few gentle chords, coaxed from the harp, a flutter from the ney flute, and a beat so soft it's more suggestion than sound. You rise and follow the path away from the troughs, your sandals crunching softly against gravel as you make your way toward what looks like a round, squat structure, half sunk into the ground. At first glance, it could be mistaken for a storage mound or a collapsed kiln, but as you approach, you notice its wide, conical shape and a curious opening at the top. This finally is the beating heart of your chilly journey, a Yakchow. Mainstream historical fact. Yakchows were ancient Persian ice houses, a kind of above-ground, dome-shaped evaporative cooler designed to store ice year-round, even in blistering desert heat, made of thick mud brick insulated with a special mortar called saruj, a mix of clay, sand, ash, egg whites, lime, and goat hair. These structures were thermally isolated and sometimes connected to qanats for passive cooling. Some yak chows were so effective they kept ice frozen deep into summer. You run your hand along the outer surface. It's cool, smoother than expected, the bricks set in tight, deliberate patterns. There's a whisper of air at your feet, cold air, seeping up through a vent. Someone's thought through every inch of this. A young man waves you over to a narrow entryway. You duck your head and step inside. And now, the temperature drop is immediate. Not shocking, just present, like stepping into a quiet cave. The air smells faintly of wet clay, dry mint, and a distant, almost electrical chill. Your eyes adjust slowly. The floor slopes downward in a spiral, leading you to a lower chamber sunk deep into the earth. There, in the centre, lies a shallow pit, surrounded by stacks of large circular ice blocks, cut and stacked like translucent bread loaves. Yes, actual ice. In the middle of the desert, quirky tidbit, some of the best ice used in Persian yak chows wasn't harvested from frozen rivers, but made, using open-air shallow pools, filled at night during winter. As the desert's nightly temperatures dropped below freezing, the water would freeze into thin sheets. These were carefully collected each morning and carried inside the yak chow. Layer by layer, the ice was built up over weeks like pastry in a frost-flavoured baklava. A few workers are inside now, wrapping one of the ice blocks in a thick felt cloth soaked with rose water. It's destined for the palace kitchens. The scent is unmistakable. You breathe in deeply, half expecting to taste it on your tongue. A wooden shelf lines the wall. On it, a collection of clay bottles rests, sealed and labelled with wax-stamped tags. These are the true treasures. Wines preserved not just in darkness, but in silence and cold. A bottle marked Royal Vineyard Spring Pressing glistens faintly with condensation. You watch as a servant gingerly extracts one of the bottles and hands it off to a runner, who dashes out into the dust toward the kitchens. Somewhere in the palace, a feast is beginning, and here's where historians still argue. Were yak chows purely utilitarian structures, or did they carry symbolic meaning as well? Some scholars suggest they were seen as sacred spaces of balance, fire outside, ice within. Others think the geometry of their construction held cosmological significance, echoing Zoroastrian beliefs about elemental harmony. Or maybe they were just really clever coolers. That's the magic of ancient engineering. It rarely explains itself. As you move through the chamber, your breath clouds faintly. It's the first time today you've seen that. A feather-light chill dances across your skin, raising small goosebumps despite the layers. But you don't mind. After all, this coal wasn't forced or generated. It was coaxed, invited, tucked gently into this dome of baked earth, like a sleeping guest. You sit on a low bench beside the inner wall, one hand trailing along the cool stone. Overhead, the dome curves like a sheltering sky. Through a small aperture at the very top, the badger or windcatcher, you glimpse a patch of darkening sky. Stars begin to appear, faint pinpricks against a violet canvas. A soft thud echoes from somewhere in the structure. A worker dropping a felt mat, maybe, or an amphora being moved. It doesn't disturb you. If anything, it reminds you that this place is alive, not a museum, not forgotten. You reach down and touch a small patch of frost that's formed along the base of one bottle. It melts under your fingers in seconds, but in that brief contact, you realise the genius of it all. The Empire didn't need electricity or coils or freon. They needed only time, patience, and the humility to work with nature instead of against it. The flute music from the courtyard drifts faintly into the dome, its notes slowed by walls of clay and ice. It sounds almost underwater, dreamlike, and so you sit, cool and content, in a dome of forgotten brilliance, cradled by earth, kissed by ice, and filled with wine that still remembers the spring sun it once ripened under. The air wraps around you like silk dipped in snow. Still seated inside the yak chow, your limbs have begun to relax in that particular way, the body does when it's been bathed in contrast all day. Heat and dust outside, chill and stillness here within. But rest is temporary. The servant who'd offered you the cup of pine resin wine earlier peeks his head into the dome, gestures gently. It's time to move again. You step into the warm night, blinking at the sudden brightness of starlight. The compound is quieter now. The days hum, giving way to gentle murmurs and the rustling of linens. Your path winds through the outer corridors toward what looks like a modest kitchen complex. Low, windowless structures with soot-darkened chimneys and rows of clay ovens. A few fires still smoulder, glowing like sleeping coals. You duck through a wide arch and enter the wine mixing room. Mainstream historical fact. The Persians rarely drank wine straight. It was common practice to mix it with herbs, spices, sweeteners, even water, sometimes hot, sometimes cold. This wasn't just about taste. It was tied to both etiquette and medicine. Wine was seen not as a blunt drink, but a carefully curated elixir. One's blend said a lot about their status, their health, even their mood. Inside the room, rows of small amphorae line a low shelf, each marked with painted icons, a pomegranate, a sprig of mint, a curled cinnamon stick. Nearby, a slate board lists the evening's combinations. You read it slowly. Cherry and wormwood, honey, almond and lavender, sour grape, mint and black cumin. A trio of older men, one with an improbably perfect moustache, are engaged in what appears to be a heated debate over the ratios for a cold evening blend. One insists on more cardamom, another rolls his eyes. You're handed a cup mid-squabble and are encouraged to sip without preamble. It's sharp at first, rose vinegar and dried sumac, but mellows into something rich and warm, like the memory of fruit after it's been baked. You nod approvingly. The men seem satisfied. The moustached one gestures with mock pride, clearly convinced his spice was the clincher. Quirky tidbit time. There's some evidence that elite Persian households experimented with aged wines, stored in goat stomachs, not for preservation, but for the infusion of oils and natural enzymes. While no one's replicating that process tonight, a clay pot in the corner does seem to carry an unusually gamey aroma. You wisely steer clear. Instead, your attention is drawn to the herbalist's bench. Here, an elderly woman with deeply inked hands is preparing a set of sachets, small linen bundles filled with crushed herbs, fruit peel, and bark shavings. These will be soaked in warm wine tomorrow for the sick, or simply exhausted. You watch as she folds one closed with a sliver of palm reed. Her touch is methodical, reverent. She catches you staring and explains in a whisper-soft voice that tonight's wine must match the body's need. Too warm, and it stirs the fire. Too cold, and the wind gets in your joints. You nod like you understand. Mostly, you're hypnotized by her voice, which sounds like dried leaves being stirred gently in a bowl. Historians still argue whether these Persian wine customs were imported from older Mesopotamian traditions or developed independently. Some say the practice mirrors ancient medicinal principles found in texts from Babylon and Assyria. Others believe the Persians refined them uniquely, layering in their own philosophies of balance, humorism, and hospitality. There's no consensus, just a shared appreciation that these weren't just recipes, but rituals. You take another cup, this one mellow, with cool cinnamon, dried apricot, and a whisper of poppy seed, and make your way to the outer courtyard. There, a fire crackles softly in a brazier, not for heat, but light and scent. A servant adds a pinch of saffron and something resinous. The smoke curls upward like a cat stretching. A small group has gathered to drink quietly. No games now, just sips and silence. One man mutters something about a camel that drank too much date wine. No one reacts for a beat then. Soft chuckles ripple around the group. Even the stars seem to wink in on the joke. You sit, your back to a warm stone pillar, watching as the herbalist's apprentices begin setting out water jugs for the night. They're placed along the shaded wall, each on a ceramic base designed to encourage airflow. You recognise the technique now: evaporative cooling, passive refrigeration. Even the most basic water jar here has been engineered to beat the sun. A final sip. This one is simple, just cold spring water poured over aged grape pulp. Earthy, barely sweet. It tastes like memory, like the kind of drink you might forget until the next time you really need it. Overhead, a shooting star flashes briefly. No one comments. They've all seen 100, maybe 1,000, but you, just one, and that feels like enough. You're slower on your feet now, not from the wine. Well, maybe just a little, but from the thick calm that has settled into your bones. There's a rhythm to this place that's beginning to pulse under your skin. Not hurried, not forced, just deliberate, ancient. One of the older servants beckons you toward a quiet path that trails behind the main complex. The path is unlit, but moonlight is generous tonight, spreading itself like cream across the sand. You follow him past a fig orchard, its trees already bowed with the promise of fruit, and into a small stone-walled building, half tucked into the hillside. It smells of old earth and resin, and deep within, amphorae. Mainstream historical fact. Persian winemakers stored wine in large ceramic jars, amphorae or karas, sealed with clay or pitch, and sometimes buried to control temperature. These containers weren't just functional. Many were adorned with stamps or carvings, indicating region, vintage, or intended purpose. Medical, ceremonial, or recreational. The room is dim, lit only by a shallow oil lamp set into a wall niche. You blink as your eyes adjust. Dozens of vessels stand silently along the walls, their rounded bellies nestled in straw rings, their necks sealed with wax or packed cloth. Some are tagged with short strings of faded linen inked in delicate script. One simply reads, "Spring flood, donkey fell in." You are understandably intrigued. You make a mental note not to ask too many questions. The old servant, sensing your curiosity, leads you to a squat vessel marked with a stylized lion's head. He dips a tasting spoon and offers it to you without ceremony. Quirky tidbit. While Persian wines were usually red or amber, archaeologists have found traces of blue pigments in some ancient jars, possibly added from crushed flowers or minerals. Whether this was cosmetic flair or symbolic is unclear, but imagine sipping sapphire wine by starlight. You'd tell that story for decades. The wine you sip now is less exotic, earthy, aged, and slightly smoky. It tastes like time, like rain-soaked terracotta and dried dates left in the sun. You swallow slowly, savouring the faint tang of pomegranate vinegar woven through. You walk slowly through the cool room, fingers trailing the ribs of each ancient jar. Some still bear the fingerprints of the potters who shaped them. You can almost hear their conversations buried in the clay, probably about lunch. Historians still argue about the scale of Persian wine export. Some believe only small quantities ever left the empire, citing limited written records and inconsistent amphorae shapes. Others argue that Persian wine travelled widely via the Silk Road and maritime trade routes, often in disguised containers. Evidence of grape residue in remote trading posts hints at a much broader wine economy than official records let on. As usual, the truth is likely somewhere in the middle, stamped into an amphora that's yet to be unearthed. Your guide taps one jar playfully with a fingernail. A hollow ring answers back. "Empty," he says with mock tragedy. "Best batch. All gone." He shrugs, then winks. "But I remember it." You nod solemnly. "That seems like enough." Outside again, the air feels softer. A warm breeze brushes across your neck, tugging gently at your robe. You pass a row of clay cooling pots, still working hard, beads of moisture glistening along their curves. A lizard watches you with disinterest from atop a half-fallen wall. You arrive now at a quiet courtyard where a single table has been set beneath an old mulberry tree. On the table, 2 simple cups and a plate of salted melon. Your host, yes, that same mustachioed master of cardamom proportions, has arranged a private nightcap. He pours from a slender glass carafe filled with a deep plum-coloured wine. You raise your cup. He raises his. No words. Just a shared nod between two people who now understand a great deal more about the hidden chill of the Persian desert. The wine is cooler than expected. Not cold, but composed. Like it knows what it is. Like it's already won every argument it will ever be invited to. Above you, the stars have spread themselves into a loose tapestry. The mulberry branches silhouette the sky like fine black lace. He reaches into a pocket and pulls out a small object, a broken amphora handle, its edge still glazed in cobalt blue. He sets it on the table between you both. Found it years ago, he murmurs. Thought it looked like a question. You look closer. He's right. It does. And there, with wine on your tongue, an ancient clay under your fingertips, you realise that sometimes the best stories aren't the ones told out loud, but the ones that hum in the silence between sips. By now, you've drunk wine chilled by air, shaded by ancient towers, and laced with herbs whose names you couldn't pronounce even if you were stone-cold sober. Your guide, the mustachioed one, whose name still hasn't been revealed, and somehow that feels correct, waves you onward with a flick of the wrist. You follow, no questions asked. The path dips low and winds toward the edge of the estate, where stone gives way to sand once more, but not just empty desert. Ahead lies a grove of tamarisk trees, spindly, whispering things that shiver in the night breeze, and beyond them the slight glimmer of something wet. A qanat, mainstream historical fact. Qanats were ancient Persian underground aqueducts, engineering marvels designed to channel mountain water beneath the desert surface for miles, emerging in fertile zones to irrigate fields and supply drinking water. They created cool microclimates and were critical for sustaining agriculture, and as it turns out, winemaking. You approach the qanat's surface outlet, no more than a stone-lined pool the size of a modest bath. A low fog clings to its edges, and there's a quiet rush of water just beneath the surface, constant as breathing. A nearby bench is carved directly into the earth, smooth from centuries of use. You sit, and the stone feels cool, like it's never known the sun. Quirky tidbit. In some regions, qanats were also said to be home to protective spirits, water jinns, or guardians who ensured the flow stayed pure. Offerings were made in the form of small copper coins or rose petals, tossed into the current at certain moon phases. Local superstition, maybe, but something about the hush here makes you think twice before dipping your toes. The guide sits beside you and explains, in the low voice of someone who has told this story many times, that before wine could be cooled, before cellars were built, or domes were packed with ice, there had to be water, clean water, moving water, cold water. Some of the estate's oldest amphorae were stored along side channels, built beside the qanat, he says, dug into the earth, shaded with clay, and set where the water's cooling fingers could reach the jars indirectly. They rotated the vessels weekly to ensure even temperature, like tending to sleeping infants. Historians still argue whether this method was widespread or unique to a handful of elite estates. Written records are scarce, and the clay-lined holding chambers rarely survived intact. Some suggest the idea was borrowed from even older Egyptian cellaring practices, adapted for Persia's rugged terrain. Others insist this subterranean ingenuity was entirely homegrown. Either way, the system worked. Your guide pulls from his satchel something unexpected, a small, flat cup made of hammered bronze, for the real wine, he says, and dips it directly into the qanat's cool flow. He then produces a ceramic bottle from his robes, pours a small amount into the cup, and passes it to you. Not too sweet, like a mountain after rain. You sip. It tastes like dusk, like something aged in stillness. There's a sharpness at first, tamarind maybe, and then a soft unfolding. You can't name the flavour, and that somehow makes it more truthful. It lingers like a memory, or a regret you're oddly fond of. The man doesn't sip. He just smiles at you, then tosses a single rose petal into the water. It floats briefly, then vanishes into the dark. A rustle behind you reveals a pair of younger servants carrying more amphorae, slim ones this time, designed for transport rather than storage. They're packed in straw, wrapped in linen, soaked in cooled brine. They nod in your direction but don't speak. Just a quick word with the guide, and they head back up the trail. You ask finally where they're going. He answers without looking up. To the mountains. Someone always wants the wine colder. You think for a moment about how many hands, how many cool stones, and whispered rituals it takes to serve a single chilled cup in the middle of a desert, and how many of those rituals go unnoticed, except by those with rose-stained fingers and centuries to perfect the technique. The guide rises, brushing dust from his robe. "We've one more stop," he says. "Then you'll sleep better than any king who ever ruled this valley." You smile. That sounds like a promise worth walking for. As you rise and take one last glance at the Qanat, the wind picks up slightly, sending ripples across the surface and carrying the faintest scent of distant saffron and damp earth. Somewhere under the sand, water rushes onward, slow, ancient, and faithful. You follow him once again, deeper into the night. At this point, the estate behind you feels like a dream you once had. The domes, the melon cellars, the pigeon towers, murmuring in the dusk, all blurred at the edges, like a watercolour left out in the rain. Ahead is only sand, stairs, and a single torchlight bobbing in your guide's hand. He hums under his breath, something minor key, soothing and a little off-kilter, like a lullaby, hummed by someone who doesn't quite remember how it ends. You're not nervous, just interested. This kind of story only unspools when you're very far from your usual bedtime. Eventually, you reach a low rise in the terrain. It's crowned with smooth stone slabs and punctuated by wide, shallow pits rimmed in clay. You realise they're pits carved for ice, real ice, in the desert. Mainstream historical fact. Persian yakshals, ancient ice houses, were dome-shaped structures partially buried in the ground, often several stories tall, with thick insulating walls made of a special mortar called saruj. They use passive cooling and nocturnal temperatures to freeze water or store winter ice for use in the summer months. These structures were engineering marvels of their time and crucial for chilling food, preserving medicine, and yes, cooling wine. You stand at the edge of one such pit, now empty, but the air around it is noticeably cooler. Your guide walks its perimeter, tracing his fingers along the edge like he's reacquainting himself with an old friend. "This one," he says, "could hold 30 tons. Enough for weddings, funerals, and that one summer when the governor decided he liked his cucumbers very cold." You peer into the stone hollow, the sides are lined with dark earth and straw, and the floor still glistens with condensation, as if reluctant to forget the ice it once held. Quirky tidbit: some Persian estates flavoured their stored ice with flower waters, rose, orange blossom, or even violet, to scent the air as it melted. Guests at elite gatherings might be fanned with perfumed vapour from evaporating snow, as if summer were a mild inconvenience, and ice just another spice to be added with flair. Your guide lifts a loose stone tile and reveals a ladder leading down into a chamber. "This one's safe," he assures you. "No snakes, just stories." You descend slowly, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom, a small alcove is lit by a hanging oil lamp. Amphorae again, smaller ones this time, marked with symbols rather than script. One bears a pictogram of a lion wearing a scarf. Another, a man apparently wrestling a palm tree. Interpretation is up to you. Your host uncorks one and pours 2 small portions into glazed clay cups. You take a sip and blink. The wine is cold. Not just desert cool, but truly cold. like it remembered snow. There's a faint taste of dried apricot, mint, and some hard-to-place note, perhaps the ghost of cedarwood or crushed hyacinth. Still good, your guide says. Older than you, probably older than me too. He sits on a woven mat, gestures for you to do the same. For a few moments, there is only silence. The good kind, the kind that holds space for everything you've seen, smelled, touched, and tasted. Historians still argue whether yak chows were ever used to store alcohol. Some believe the practice would have been frowned upon due to religious customs in later periods, while others argue that private estates, particularly those of wealthy Zoroastrians and early secular nobility, used these ice chambers precisely for cooling indulgences. A handful of traveller accounts from the 10th and 11th centuries make coy references to cool cups by moonlight, which frankly feels like coded language for we snuck down here and got tipsy. You tilt your head back and gaze up the shaft, where the mouth of the pit frames the stars like a telescope aimed at forever. The desert, which seemed so hostile in theory, now feels oddly parental. Tough, yes, but generous to those who listen and adapt. The guide finishes his cup and places it down carefully. Do you know, he begins, why we make wine here, in a place where grapes should turn to dust, and wells go dry, and winter forgets to come some years? You shake your head. Because it makes no sense, he says. And still, it works. You understand. Not just intellectually, but in your bones. There's something about chilled wine in the desert that feels like a quiet rebellion, against the sun, against logic, maybe even against time itself. He rises and motions toward the ladder again. You follow. The climb feels longer, the air warmer as you go. At the top, you pause one last time and look down into the pit. The shadows seem to nod in farewell. You're starting to feel it now, that heavy-limbed calm that only comes after stories and wine, and a kind of learning that didn't require any reading. Back on the path, your guide turns toward what looks like a small shelter carved into the base of a hill. We rest now, he says, and tomorrow maybe we'll find a bottle even older than the stars. You believe him. Sleep is circling you like a cautious animal now. It doesn't want to interrupt too soon. You're still following the flicker of the torchlight ahead, still walking through sand packed firm by the feet of people long gone, but not forgotten. Every few steps you catch a whiff of something familiar, dried fig, roasted barley, a trace of cardamom baked into old walls. You're not entirely sure if these smells are real, or memories you've somehow adopted along the way. Ahead, your guide ducks into the carved-out shelter at the hill's base. From the outside, it's nearly invisible, just a darker shadow among many. Inside, though, it blooms open, like a quiet secret. Low ceilings, rounded corners, and walls that breathe coolness. There are woven mats on the floor, a stone basin with water trickling from a copper pipe, and shelves holding books with frayed spines and titles worn away by centuries of size. Mainstream historical fact. Persian hospitality, particularly in rural and desert communities, often revolved around the guest room or mehmankhane. These spaces were set apart from the main house and reserved for travellers or honoured guests. Offering cool water, fruit, and a safe place to rest wasn't just courtesy. It was ritual, rooted in ancient Zoroastrian ethics, and maintained by generations who understood the desert's dangers. You sit, or rather, you melt gently downward until you're fully grounded. The mat is thick. The pillow smells of saffron and sun-dried cotton. A small oil lamp flickers from a niche in the wall. The shadows it casts wobble slightly, like they've had a bit too much wine themselves. Your host places a ceramic plate beside you, slices of chilled melon, honey-soaked walnuts, a tiny heap of powdered sumac. It's the kind of snack that makes you want to write poetry in a language you haven't learned yet. Quirky tidbit. In some Persian poetry circles of the 12th century, wine wasn't just consumed, it was personified. Poets described it as a mischievous friend, a demanding lover, or even a sly tutor who taught hard truths in gentle sips. One even claimed wine had more wisdom than 10 viziers, and worse manners than a goat with a vendetta. Bold claims, but then again, it was really good wine. Your guide pours 2 final cups. This one is pale, almost translucent, and smells faintly of mint, cucumber, and limestone. You sip. It tastes like morning dew on marble. He doesn't speak, and neither do you. There's nothing left to ask, and no rush to finish. Historians still argue whether Persian chilled wine was purely practical or an indulgence reserved for courtly elites. Some point to records from the Achaemenid period that describe vineyard allocations, suggesting a widespread wine culture. Others believe most of the elaborate chilling and flavouring rituals were exaggerated by poets and romanticised travellers. But here, beneath a desert hill, in a guest room cooled by tradition and genius alike, those debates feel amusingly irrelevant. You begin to notice the silence now, not the absence of sound, but the presence of a very particular kind of quiet. It's the kind that only arrives when everything around you is in balance, the earth below, the stars above, and your very full belly somewhere in between. You lie back, head against the rolled linen cushion, and let your eyes drift upward to the curved ceiling. There's a tiny hole at the top, allowing a single pinprick of starlight to beam down like a lazy comet. It shifts as the torchlight fades, until it's the only illumination left. The guide pulls a light woven cover over you, linen mixed, with something that smells faintly of myrrh and frankincense. You don't remember falling asleep, only that your last clear thought is a single sentence. They chilled wine in the desert, and somehow made it feel like the most natural thing in the world. And perhaps it was. You wake, but just barely. It's that fuzzy edge of morning, or is it still night, where your body feels heavier than the earth, and your mind wanders gently without purpose. You hear something, not speech, not footsteps, just the breath of the desert beyond the shelter. A soft exhale through sand and stone. Your eyes flutter open, just enough to see that the torch is out. The little oil lamp is a quiet puddle of light now, and your host is nowhere in sight. Maybe he's gone, or maybe he was never quite there in the way you imagined. That's all right. You don't need him anymore. You stretch, just slightly, and the mat beneath you sighs in response. The chilled air still clings to the space, proof that you didn't dream the yak chow, or the wine, or the moonlit stroll across the dunes. You're sore in the good way, the way you get from walking with wonder in your legs. Mainstream historical fact. The Persian mastery of thermal architecture wasn't just about wine. From underground aqueducts, qanats, to wind towers, bad gears, their cities were filled with silent, passive technologies that manipulated airflow and temperature. These systems allowed not only cold storage, but livable indoor climates, even during scorching summers. Entire neighborhoods were designed around these principles, a kind of ancient urban planning that's only now being fully appreciated for its sustainability. You stand, or rather, you rise like bread in an oven, slow, warm, and vaguely sweet. Your clothes still hold the desert dust, and your sandals have formed a perfect mould of your journey. In one corner of the shelter, there's a small clay tablet, not a relic, just a note, scratched in wet slip and left to dry. It reads, in Persian script, something like, "Wine is a memory made drinkable. Come back when you're thirsty." You smile. It's the kind of sentiment that would look good on a mug or a throw pillow, or perhaps etched into the entrance of a yak chow, right above the shadow line where the cold begins. Quirky tidbit, there's an old legend from Yazd about a yak chow that could chill the memory of heartbreak. Women, widowed, too young, or abandoned too fast, would visit it with a silver ring and whisper their sadness into the ice. If the ring cracked when dropped inside, the story goes, their grief would freeze and stay behind. If it didn't, well, then you had to learn to dance with the heat again. Historians still argue whether tales like these are metaphorical flourishes or remnants of actual folk practices. There are enough fragmentary references in regional poetry to suggest that ice houses may have served emotional, even spiritual purposes, not just storehouses of food, but of feeling, grief, nostalgia, even hope, preserved against the summer of forgetting. You step out into the dawn, or perhaps pre-dawn. The horizon is blushing, not with fire, but the kind of cool lavender that makes you want to paint, or write letters, or just sit very still. The desert is quiet, not empty, just satisfied. And in your mind, the yak chow remains, domed, silent, half buried, but not forgotten. A testament to a people who looked at the sun, shrugged, and said, "Cool it." You begin walking, this time with no guide, but also with no worry. The dunes ripple around you like a blanket someone's just thrown over the landscape. You follow their folds. You trust the shape of the silence. There are still stories inside you, the scent of honeyed walnuts, the cold press of stone underfoot, the way chilled wine whispered secrets you can't quite recall now. But you don't need to remember everything. Some truths stay better preserved in the cool, quiet places. And speaking of quiet, now, as the desert softens into morning and the echoes of wine cellars fade into sand, your breath slows. The warmth of your pillow, the stillness of your room, and the story you've wandered through all settle like dust at the end of a long dreamy evening. There's no need to hold on to every detail, the names, the dates, the construction of underground canals. Let them float gently into the background, like footprints being smoothed by wind. What matters is the feeling that even in the hottest, harshest place, people found a way to make something beautiful, cool, sweet, worth sharing. So, sink a little deeper now. Imagine the taste of chilled melon, the flicker of oil lamp shadows, the low hum of the earth, exhaling through clay vents. The world you walk through tonight isn't gone. It's just folded neatly behind your eyelids, waiting for the next time you wander past the edge of waking. And as you drift down into your own quiet yak chow of dreams, know this: somewhere out there, beneath stars or centuries or sand, someone is still pouring 2 cups of wine and waiting for a story to begin. Sleep well, traveller. Sweet dreams.